The Hermit Kingdom's enduring grip, an introduction to North Korea in 2024. North Korea entered 2024 much as it had existed for decades. It remained a nation sealed off from much of the world. The Kim family regime, now under its third leader, Kim Jong-un, continued to exert absolute control. The lives of its approximately 26 million citizens were dictated by the state's ideology and its unyielding pursuit of power. Information flowing into the country was meticulously filtered, and information flowing out was often a dangerous act. This isolation was not accidental. It was a carefully constructed policy designed to maintain the government's grip, shielding its people from outside influences and its actions from widespread international condemnation, a difficult task in an increasingly connected world. The state's narrative painted a picture of a socialist paradise, strong and self-reliant. However, reports from defectors, undercover journalists, and international human rights organizations told a starkly different story. They spoke of widespread suffering and a deeply entrenched system of repression. The year 2024 saw no significant deviation from this oppressive path. The government's policies continued to prioritize its military ambitions and the consolidation of its power over the well-being of its populace. Daily life for ordinary North Koreans was a constant negotiation with scarcity, fear, and the omnipresent gaze of the state, a reality far removed from the vibrant images presented by state media. The COVID-19 pandemic had provided the regime with a further pretext to tighten its already formidable controls. Borders, which were already among the most heavily fortified in the world, became even more impermeable. While some minor relaxations in border policies were noted in 2024 for specific groups like Russian tourists or UN delegations, for ordinary North Koreans the walls only seemed to grow higher. The extreme measures implemented under the guise of public health protection exacerbated existing hardships, further limiting access to food, medicine, and any form of unsanctioned information, making an already difficult existence even more precarious for millions. This essay explores the conditions within North Korea in 2024, looking closely at the human rights situation and the role of technology. It delves into the daily struggles of ordinary people, the severe restrictions on their freedoms, and the government policies that perpetuate this environment. We will hear echoes of real-life stories painting a picture of resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. It also examines the international community's ongoing efforts to address these grave issues, seeking to understand what, if anything, changed in the landscape of this isolated nation as the world moved through 2024. The foundation of control in North Korea is its pervasive system of surveillance and social classification. The system, a socio-political classification assigned at birth, dictates nearly every aspect of a citizen's life. It determines access to education, employment, housing, and even food. Those with a hostile, perhaps due to family history or perceived political disloyalty, face systematic discrimination and are often relegated to the lowest rungs of society. This system, deeply entrenched since the nation's founding, ensures a compliant populace by rewarding loyalty and severely punishing any hint of dissent, creating a society built on fear and suspicion. Arbitrary arrest and detention are commonplace. The concept of due process is virtually non-existent. Citizens can be imprisoned for the slightest infraction, often without trial or access to legal representation. Torture and inhumane treatment in detention facilities, including political prison camps known as, are widely reported and systematically employed to extract confessions or punish perceived enemies of the state. These camps hold tens of thousands of individuals, many of whom endure forced labor, starvation, and brutal conditions. The year 2024 saw no evidence of a reduction in these practices. Human Rights Watch confirmed the regime continued to enforce obedience through such cruel methods. Sexual and gender-based violence is a grim, yet often unacknowledged reality for many North Korean women and girls. Reports indicate that such violence is widespread and frequently goes unpunished, normalized within a patriarchal society, and often perpetrated by officials in positions of power. Women who are forcibly repatriated from China, for example, often face horrific abuse, including forced abortions and sexual violence in detention centers. The state offers little to no protection or recourse for victims. This lack of accountability further entrenches the suffering and vulnerability of women, adding another layer to the human rights crisis unfolding within the country's borders. The state's control extends into the most personal aspects of life. Decisions about where to live, what to study, and whom to marry can be influenced or directly controlled by authorities. Religious freedom is non-existent. Any religious practice outside of state-sanctioned and heavily controlled organizations is met with severe punishment. The cult of personality surrounding the Kim family is the only permissible form of worship. This absolute control over individual lives ensures that the state remains the ultimate arbiter of fate for every North Korean, crushing personal autonomy and fostering an environment of constant apprehension and enforced conformity to the regime's dictates. In North Korea, information is a dangerous commodity, more precious and perilous than gold. The state maintains an absolute monopoly on all forms of media. Televisions and radios are pre-tuned to government channels, broadcasting a relentless stream of propaganda, glorifying the leaders and vilifying external enemies. Newspapers and books are all state-published, offering no alternative viewpoints. Accessing any unsanctioned foreign media, a South Korean drama, a Hollywood film, or an international news broadcast is a serious crime. This information blockade is crucial for the regime, as it prevents citizens from understanding the world outside or the true nature of their own government. The consequences for defying these information controls were starkly illustrated in 2024. In July of that year, a man was reportedly sentenced to 7 years of hard labor simply for borrowing an SD card containing South Korean movies. The woman who lent him the card received an even harsher sentence, 15 years. Such severe punishments serve as a chilling deterrent to others. Even listening to a foreign radio broadcast in the privacy of one's home carries immense risk. The government employs a vast network of informants, and neighbors are often encouraged to report on one another, creating an atmosphere of pervasive distrust and fear where a simple act of curiosity can lead to ruin. Contact with the outside world is also severely restricted and ruthlessly punished. In 2024, a woman and her parents were reportedly sentenced to forced labor. Their crime was receiving money sent from relatives overseas and helping others connect with family members who had managed to escape to South Korea. For a regime built on isolation, such connections represent a direct threat, a potential conduit for unregulated information, and a reminder of the freedoms denied to those within. The state views these acts not as families trying to support each other, but as acts of espionage or subversion to be stamped out with brutal efficiency. Even athletes representing North Korea on the international stage are not immune. In August 2024, North Korean athletes who participated in the Paris Olympics faced intense scrutiny and the possibility of punishment upon their return. Their offense? Taking selfies, a seemingly innocuous act in most parts of the world. For the North Korean regime, however, any unscripted interaction or display of individual expression by its citizens abroad is viewed with suspicion. It highlights the extreme lengths to which the government will go to control the narrative and prevent any cracks from appearing in its carefully constructed facade of ideological purity and unwavering loyalty. The digital landscape in North Korea presented a complex picture in 2024. After a period of relative inactivity during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the domestic smartphone market showed signs of resurgence. Reports from organizations like the Stimson Center's 38 North project, particularly in September 2024, indicated an increase in smartphone imports and the introduction of a new 4G cellular network. This suggested a desire by the state to modernize certain aspects of its infrastructure and allow for more internal digital communication, albeit under its watchful eye. However, this limited technological advancement was far from a gateway to open information. The smartphones available to North Koreans are not the devices known globally. They operate on a state-controlled intranet, effectively a walled garden, offering access only to government-approved content, games and services. There is no access to the global internet. Every device is preloaded with surveillance software, and all activity is monitored. While the new 4G network promised faster speeds, it also potentially offered the state more efficient means of tracking and controlling its citizens' limited digital interactions. Technology, in this context, became another layer of control, a digital leash rather than a tool for liberation. Despite these severe restrictions, the hunger for outside information persists, and technology, even in its most rudimentary forms, plays a role in the clandestine efforts to obtain it. Smuggled USB drives and SD cards containing foreign films, music and news continue to circulate, passed secretly between trusted individuals. These small devices represent a significant risk, but also a vital link to the outside world for those brave enough to seek it. The very existence of a black market for such content underscores the failure of the state's complete information blockade and the inherent human desire for knowledge and connection beyond prescribed boundaries. The government is acutely aware of these technological loopholes and constantly works to plug them. This includes developing more sophisticated software to detect and delete illegal files, conducting random device checks, and imposing severe punishments on those caught with contraband data. The resurgence of the smartphone market and the introduction of 4G in 2024 likely came with enhanced surveillance capabilities. For the North Korean regime, technology is a double-edged sword, a necessary component of modern statehood and economic activity, but also a potential threat to its information monopoly that must be meticulously managed and controlled. Section 5. Chains of the State, the unseen toil of forced labor. Forced labor is not an anomaly in North Korea. It is a deeply institutionalized and systematic practice, integral to the functioning of the state's economy and its mechanisms of social control. The government routinely mobilizes vast swathes of its population, including children, students, soldiers, and ordinary workers, for uncompensated labor in various sectors. This can range from agriculture and construction to mining and logging, often under harsh and dangerous conditions. As reported by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in July 2024, this system of exploitation is deeply embedded within the country's legal and administrative frameworks, essentially making it a state-sponsored enterprise. Citizens are compelled to participate in these labor mobilizations through various means, including mandatory assignments from schools, workplaces, or state-affiliated organizations. Failure to participate can result in severe repercussions, including denial of food rations, loss of employment, or even imprisonment. The labor is often physically demanding, with long hours and little regard for safety or health. Workers are typically not paid, or if they are, the wages are negligible and insufficient to sustain a basic livelihood. This exploitation props up the state's infrastructure projects and generates revenue for the regime, all on the backs of its unpaid citizenry. The international community has repeatedly condemned North Korea's use of forced labor. The country has notably not joined the International Labour Organization, a UN agency dedicated to promoting workers' rights and decent work. This refusal highlights the regime's unwillingness to adhere to international labour standards or subject its practices to external scrutiny. The products of this forced labour sometimes find their way into international supply chains, often through complex and opaque routes, making it a challenge for global businesses to ensure their operations are not tainted by these egregious human rights violations, further complicating international efforts to isolate the regime economically. The conditions are particularly horrific in North Korea's extensive network of political prison camps, and ordinary prison camps, where inmates are subjected to backbreaking labor as a form of punishment. Starvation, disease, and brutality are rampant in these facilities, and many prisoners do not survive their sentences. The UN Security Council even held a public meeting in June 2024 specifically focusing on North Korea's human rights abuses, including forced labor, and how these practices enable the funding of its illicit nuclear weapons and missile programs. This demonstrates a growing international recognition of the link between internal repression and external threats posed by the regime. Section 6. The Daily Grind, Economic Hardship and the Fight for Basic Needs. The economic situation for ordinary North Koreans remained dire throughout 2024. A study from South Korea released that year estimated North Korea's 2023 gross national income per capita at approximately 1.6 million KRW, which translates to around $1,200. This figure, already alarmingly low, masks profound social and economic inequalities within the country. While the elite in Pyongyang may enjoy a relatively comfortable lifestyle, the vast majority of the population struggles daily with chronic food insecurity and a severe lack of access to basic necessities, including adequate healthcare. The right to health is severely compromised for many. The state-run healthcare system is chronically underfunded, lacks essential medicines and equipment, and is often inaccessible to those outside the privileged classes or major urban centers. A UNICEF report from February 2024 noted that while North Korea had reactivated its immunization routines in 2023 after pandemic-related disruptions, clinics often lacked the necessary supplies and knowledge to effectively carry them out. For ordinary citizens, illness can mean a desperate search for unaffordable black market medicines or reliance on traditional remedies with little hope of receiving proper medical attention. The COVID-19 restrictions, enforced from 2020 to 2023, had a devastating impact on the already fragile livelihoods of many North Koreans. The sealing of borders and severe internal movement restrictions choked off most informal market activities and cross-border trade, which had become crucial income sources for a significant portion of the population, particularly women. While official trade with China reportedly reached almost pre-pandemic levels in 2023, the benefits did not appear to trickle down to the average citizen still grappling with the economic fallout. The long-term effects of these restrictions continued to be felt acutely in 2024. Compounding these issues, natural disasters frequently threaten North Korea's agricultural output. In August 2024, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization raised serious concerns over the impact of recent heavy floods on food production. Given the country's already precarious food security situation, where a significant portion of the population relies on state rations that are often insufficient, such events can push many families to the brink of starvation. The government's prioritization of military spending over agricultural investment and disaster preparedness further exacerbates the vulnerability of its people to these recurring crises, trapping them in a cycle of hardship. Section 7. Invisible Walls and Perilous Paths. The dream of freedom of movement. Freedom of movement, a basic right taken for granted in many parts of the world, is a distant dream for most North Koreans. Travel within the country, even between provinces, requires official permission, which is often difficult to obtain. This restriction serves to maintain tight control over the population, prevent the unauthorized spread of information, and limit opportunities for collective action. For those living in less privileged regions, obtaining permission to travel to Pyongyang or other better supplied areas is nearly impossible, reinforcing regional disparities and limiting access to opportunities and resources for a vast majority of the population. Attempting to leave North Korea without permission is considered a grave crime, tantamount to treason. Border guards along the frontiers with China and Russia reportedly operate under unconditionally shoot orders for anyone caught trying to flee. Despite these extreme dangers, a small number of North Koreans still undertake the perilous journey to escape, often relying on brokers and navigating treacherous routes through Southeast Asia. However, increased surveillance, tightened border controls in North Korea, and stricter enforcement by neighboring countries, particularly China, meant that the number of successful defections remained very low in 2024. China's policy of forcibly repatriating North Korean refugees is a significant obstacle and a source of grave concern for human rights advocates. Once returned, defectors face certain imprisonment, torture, sexual violence, and potentially execution. In April 2024, reports indicated that China forcibly returned approximately 60 North Korean refugees, sending them back to a fate of unimaginable suffering. This practice violates China's obligations under international refugee law, yet it continues, reflecting the complex geopolitical relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang and the prioritization of political stability over humanitarian concerns. Despite its general isolation, North Korea made some tentative moves to reopen to the outside world in limited ways during 2024. In February, the country cautiously opened its border to vetted groups of Russian tourists, a sign of its deepening ties with Moscow. A UN Food and Agriculture Organization delegation also visited in July, the first such UN visit since the pandemic began. Furthermore, in August, Pyongyang announced plans to potentially reopen to broader international tourism by December 2024. However, these openings were highly controlled and selective, offering little hope for increased freedom of movement for ordinary North Korean citizens themselves who remain trapped within their nation's confines. Section 8. A world-aware international scrutiny and calls for justice in 2024. The dire human rights situation in North Korea did not go unnoticed by the international community in 2024. The year marked the 10th anniversary of the landmark 2014 UN Commission of Inquiry report, which meticulously documented crimes against humanity in the country. This anniversary spurred renewed calls and efforts for accountability for the perpetrators of these widespread and systematic abuses. The COI report remains a critical foundation for understanding the scale and nature of the atrocities committed by the North Korean regime, and its findings continued to resonate in international forums throughout the year, reminding the world of the urgent need for action. In March 2024, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in North Korea, Elizabeth Salmon, presented her report to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, with a strong focus on accountability. Following this, in April, the HRC adopted a resolution mandating the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to prepare and publish a comprehensive follow-up report. This new report would detail the human rights developments in North Korea since the original COI report in 2014, aiming to provide an updated and thorough assessment of the ongoing violations and reinforce the case for justice. Efforts to maintain international pressure face significant challenges. In a setback for sanctions enforcement, Russia in March 2024 vetoed the renewal of the mandate for the UN Security Council's panel of experts. This panel had been crucial for monitoring UN sanctions against North Korea, which were imposed due to its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. The veto was widely seen as a move to shield Pyongyang, with whom Moscow had been expanding military cooperation, including alleged transfers of material for Russia's war in Ukraine. This development highlighted the geopolitical complexities complicating efforts to hold North Korea accountable for its actions on multiple fronts. Despite such setbacks, other initiatives moved forward. The 2024 International Dialogue on North Korean Human Rights was held in July, co-hosted by prominent organizations including CSIS and the ROK Ministry of Unification. This event brought together experts, officials and defectors like Gum Hyok Kim and Gyuri Kang to share the reality of the human rights situation and bolster international solidarity. Furthermore, in October 2024, the United States, Japan and South Korea announced the formation of a new multilateral sanctions monitoring team, aiming to fill some of the void left by the disbanded UN panel, signaling a continued commitment from key nations to scrutinize North Korea's illicit activities. Section 9. Echoes of Hope Amidst Despair, the Ongoing Quest for Change. The year 2024 in North Korea painted a grim yet familiar picture of a nation where the fundamental rights and freedoms of its people remained systematically denied. The government of Kim Jong-un continued its repressive policies, prioritizing its own power and military ambitions over the welfare of its citizens. Daily life for ordinary North Koreans was an ongoing struggle against state control, economic hardship, and the constant fear of arbitrary punishment. The digital age, while bringing slight changes to the technological landscape with smartphone resurgence, primarily served as another tool for state surveillance rather than a conduit for liberation, further tightening the regime's grip. Despite the overwhelming control exerted by the state, the desire for information, freedom, and a better life persists within the hearts of many North Koreans. The courageous stories of those who risk everything to access foreign media, to contact relatives abroad, or to attempt the perilous journey of escape are testaments to the resilience of the human spirit. These acts of defiance, however small, represent cracks in the monolithic facade of the regime. They underscore the importance of efforts to break the information blockade and provide North Koreans with alternative narratives to the state's pervasive propaganda, offering a glimpse of a different world. The international community's role in addressing this protracted human rights crisis remains crucial, while geopolitical realities, such as Russia's veto of the UN panel of experts, present significant challenges. The continued efforts by the UN Human Rights Council, the Special Rapporteur, and dedicated NGOs are vital. Dialogues, reports, and targeted sanctions serve to document abuses, maintain pressure on the regime, and keep the plight of the North Korean people on the global agenda. The push for accountability, however slow and arduous, is essential to signal that crimes against humanity will not be tolerated or forgotten by the wider world. Looking forward from mid-2025, the path towards meaningful improvement in North Korea's human rights situation appears long and fraught with obstacles. Yet global awareness and sustained international engagement are indispensable. Supporting civil society groups, empowering defectors to share their stories, and exploring all avenues for communication and information dissemination are key strategies. The faint echoes of hope lie in the unwavering courage of those inside North Korea who seek change, and in the steadfast commitment of the outside world to stand in solidarity with them, working towards a future where basic human dignity is no longer a forbidden dream.